Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at a fascinating scientific mystery. Picture a beautiful, bustling coastal city, famous for its sandy beaches and historic ports. Now imagine an invisible threat weaving right through its streets. A threat that impacts literally every single person living there, yet it remains almost completely unmeasured. Today, we're unpacking a groundbreaking effort to finally map the air we breathe in Mombasa, Kenya. And we'll see how localized data might just be the key to saving lives. Okay, let's dive into this. The global stakes here are absolutely staggering. We are talking about 6.5 million premature deaths globally, every single year, linked directly to the air we breathe. It's actually the fourth leading cause of global morbidity and mortality, trailing just behind high blood pressure, smoking, and unhealthy diets. But here is the terrifying blind spot. Across sub-Saharan Africa, this major health risk is substantially understudied. We have a massive life-or-death data gap on our hands. Section 1. The invisible coastal threat. So, in Mombasa, which is a bustling port city of about 3.5 million people, the primary culprit is something called PM 2.5. Now, you might already know that these fine particulate hazards are super dangerous because they completely bypass our upper respiratory defenses and deposit deep into the pulmonary region. But in Mombasa, they come from a highly specific local cocktail. You've got heavy haulage trucks, cargo ships, iron smelting, cement factories, and the open burning of biomass fuels. And all of this is sitting right next to residential areas and World Heritage sites. Section 2. Bridging the data gap. Well, you know the old saying, you can't fix what you can't measure. And to map this invisible threat in a city with very little existing infrastructure, researchers had to get pretty creative. Now, the traditional way to do this uses a reference grade monitor, like the TOM 140A. It's incredibly precise, literally weighing particles on a tiny oscillating filter. But it costs upwards of $10,000. That means cities can usually only afford one or two of them, so they're stationary and incredibly sparse. But there's a new paradigm in town. Low-cost sensors like the Clarity Node S. These run anywhere between $150 to $3,000, and they use light scattering to detect particles. They're IoT-enabled, they're portable, and they allow for a high-density, real-time tracking network across an entire city. Honestly, it's a real game-changer. Now, what's really interesting about this mapping effort is exactly where researchers placed these low-cost spokes. They purposely chose diverse microenvironments to get a true, comprehensive picture of the city. So you have sensors in Changamwe, which is a heavy industrial area near the port. You have them in Bamburi, a mix of residential and industrial zones. And then you have them all the way over in Yali, a beautiful ocean-influenced tourist and suburban area. Section 3. Calibrating the sensors. Okay, but here is a major plot twist. Cheap sensors suffer from something called environmental drift. In a coastal city like Mombasa, the salty, highly humid ocean air actually interferes with the optical lasers inside these low-cost units. It causes them to over-predict the pollution. So how do we fix this? Well, researchers used a brilliant hub-and-spoke strategy. They placed one of the cheap sensors right next to the highly expensive, highly accurate TEOM monitor at the University of Nairobi campus site. And for months, across both wet and dry seasons, they compared the data. Using a statistical method called multiple linear regression, they essentially taught the cheap sensor how to account for that humidity and temperature. This calibration was absolutely crucial. It cut the error margin of those low-cost sensors almost in half. Section 4. What the data shows. So, with the network distributed and freshly calibrated, the researchers captured the very first surface observations of PM 2.5 ever recorded in Mombasa. And what they found was staggering. 50%. That's right. The researchers discovered that sites located near frequent industrial activity exceeded the World Health Organization's daily healthy limits for PM 2.5 more than 50% of the time. Now, the overall averages across the city range from 12 to 18 micrograms per cubic meter, which is actually somewhat lower than other major African cities, but those localized hotspots, they told a much more alarming story. When you look at the daily averaged PM 2.5 concentrations across these different sites, a stark contrast emerges. In Changwe, the industrial port area, the data reveals a massive long tail that represents days of extreme elevated pollution, likely driven by heavy haulage traffic and port operations. Now compare that to Nyali. The data there indicates relatively cleaner, much more consistent air in the coastal suburbs. It goes to show your health literally depends on exactly which neighborhood you're standing in. And this brilliantly illustrates the timing of the pollution. There's a very distinct bimodal pattern here. Pollution aggressively spikes in the early morning, right between 6 and 8 a.m., and then again in the evening between 5 and 9 p.m. This perfectly aligns with the daily rhythm of human activity, right? You've got rush hour commuter traffic, matatus, tuk-tuks, and port activities all kicking into high gear, combined with daily changes in the atmospheric mixing height.
Section 5. The Breathe Mombasa Proposal.
Of course, data alone isn't enough to protect a community, is it? We need an action plan. Enter Breathe Mombasa. This is a highly structured 4-phase implementation roadmap designed to take this initial scientific study and expand it into a permanent citywide monitoring network. It kicks off with a baseline assessment to map pollutants, moves to a pilot deployment to test hardware and that harsh, salty air, and is then followed by rigorous data validation. The ultimate goal? Phase 4 is a full rollout, expanding to over 50 sensor nodes across the city, complete with a public-facing app so residents can actually get real-time air quality alerts. But honestly, the true genius of this proposal is community ownership. Because data won't clean the air, people will. The whole success of this framework relies on partnering with schools to turn students into citizen scientists. It builds crucial bridges between local government and academic researchers, so the data is actually credible for policymaking. It engages the port operators and trekking associations directly to discuss cleaner routes. And most importantly, it aims to correlate this localized air data directly with respiratory admissions at local health centers. That humanizes the numbers, you know? It creates an undeniable call to action for policymakers. Which leaves us with a pretty powerful thought. The researchers in Mombasa took consumer-grade technology, calibrated it with high-end science, and exposed an invisible threat hiding right in plain sight. They are actively moving from monitoring to actual mitigation. So if this can be done in a complex coastal port city in Kenya, how might this kind of localized, data-driven approach transform public health and urban planning where you live? Thanks for joining me on The Explainer today, and keep questioning the world around you.